All right. First of all, I'd like to welcome you all to the first event in the fall 2018 series of the City Talks on the theme of the radical possibilities of alternative urbanisms. My name is Ruben Rose Fredwood, and I'm a professor of geography at the University of Victoria, as well as the current chair of the UVic Committee for Urban Studies, which runs the City Talks. I'd like to begin by first acknowledging that this event is taking place on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, and we're grateful to be here tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge the financial support of the EU Center of Excellence, the Faculty of Social Sciences, and the Department of Geography at the University of Victoria, which have all sponsored this year's City Talks. Now tonight, the topic of tonight's City Talks panel is alternative urbanisms in the city of Victoria. And we have a diverse group of panelists who will be sharing the work they've been doing on some really exciting local initiatives here in Victoria. And I've given each panelist 15 minutes to speak, and I've asked them a week or so back, or a few weeks back now, I posed a particular question for each of the panelists to consider. So that question is, what work have you or your organization done to reimagine or reshape the past, present, and or future of the city in which we live? And how might this contribute toward opening new possibilities of alternative urban futures for the city of Victoria and Coast Salish territories? So our first speaker tonight is Bianca Elliot, who has helped lead a youth-driven Indigenous land restoration initiative called Project Reclaim to promote youth food justice in the Sartlip community. The next speaker will be Boma Brown, who is the founder and board member of the support network of Indigenous women, for Indigenous women and women of color. And she's also currently the Director of Internal Affairs at the Vancouver Island Public Interest Research Group, or VIPER. Following Boma will be Lauren Daniel, who is the founder and board member, and current vice president of the Greater Victoria Placemaking Network, as well as the recipient of the Thinklandia Victoria Mayor's Medal for Public Leadership. Lauren will then be followed by Todd Littman, who is the founder and executive director of the Victoria Transport Policy Institute. And last but not least, we have a group of speakers, Alan Antiff, Kim Croswell, and Evan Burrito, who will be joining us to discuss their work as organizers of the upcoming Victoria Anarchist Bookfair. So after these presentations, depending on how much time we have, we'll then open it up for discussion with the audience. So please join me in welcoming our City Talks panelists tonight.
I'm just going to set a stopwatch so I know when to quit. My name is Bianca Elliot. I come from the Sartlip First Nation, which belongs to the Saanich Nation. So I don't know how familiar everybody is with the territory that you're on, but if we were to go down the Patney Highway towards the BC ferries, you pass through my territory and my homelands. And on your left-hand side, right where the Mill Bay Ferry is, you'll come to Sartlip. So that's where I was born and raised. That's where my family roots are. My dad is Charles Elliot. He was also born and raised in the Sartlip community. On my mother's side, I'm from the Songhees Lekwungen First Nation. So I also have roots right here where we're standing. And I put up on the presentation the place name that we're actually on, which is, I'm going to try to say this, it's not in Sinchothan alphabet. I know Sinchothan alphabet, I don't know this version, but it is Squatsumnilch. So that translates to bitter cherry. And I invite everybody in this room to think about the place that you're on in the context of an Indigenous context. And I think that's something that we forget in our day-to-day lives. And I always ask people this question, like, do you know whose territory you're on? And are you a part of it? Are you a part of that Indigenous community? If you're not, what are you going to do to be a part of that community? And I think that's something we need to challenge ourselves to do. How many people have stepped foot on a reserve? several people, you guys are rad, and that's why you're here tonight. But I think that's not the case for a lot of people, and a lot of people aren't connected to the communities that they're living on. And I think if we're starting to think about possibilities of alternative radical urbanism, we have to start by acknowledging where we are and our place where we are. So yeah, that's my first kind of question for you guys, is to dig a little bit deeper and find out where you are, and maybe how you can be more connected to the first peoples of the land. I'll use this thing. There we go. I'm here tonight on behalf of Project Reclaim, Saanich Youth for Justice. It's a partnership with the Victoria Sexual Assault Centre and the Startlip First Nation, and it came from a vision that I had, and also a collective vision of youth in our community. If I were to go back in time, maybe 2 years ago, my sister had passed away, and it wasn't a very nice situation. It was unexpected, and this is a story I haven't told in public before, but I'm telling you tonight. And somebody at her funeral, who was her best friend, was very upset about it, and she spoke up, and she spoke really loudly and clearly, and she told everybody in that room to put down the bottle. It was a group of people who were close to my sister, and she said, put down the bottle, don't pick it up again and leave it there, and pick up your tradition, and pick up your community, and make yourself strong with your community. And that really kind of resonated with me, because I felt really lost at that point in my life. And we have certain ceremony in our community, but not everybody belongs to that. And I thought, how can I belong in my community, and how can other youth belong in my community, and how can things like youth suicide and alcoholism and drug use and lots of other problems be fixed through culture. And I started looking at the land and looking at my community, and there's a very big difference between off-reserve and on-reserve. And why is that? If we're taught through our Saanich traditions to steward the land and to take care of the land and to take care of our people, why are we struggling so much? And so I kind of came up with this vision for youth to have mentors and to have elders teaching them and leading them to take care of our land ourselves, and to have youth do the work and have youth lead that, and to also basically reclaim identity and reclaim culture. So this is how Project Reclaim kind of came to be. And there's a lot of different ways that we do it, but our main goal is to reclaim identity, land, and culture, and to use that to resist the violence that we're experiencing. And to also build better bridges between non-Indigenous community members. So that's really been our main vision and goal. There's lots of different ways that we do it. I put this quote up here: as we name violence, we begin to find ways to heal and resist this violence. And that's really important for me to ground myself in, and also to share with other people, because if we don't recognize what's happening to this day, and how it's happening to the Indigenous peoples here, we can't move forward in a good way. So one of the ways that we actually work with Project Reclaim is by actually reclamation of land by youth and by other community members. Our first site was a playground in our community. It's behind a bunch of social housing, and in my community we don't have funds for infrastructure, and we don't have funding to have things like park maintenance. So this playground, even though it was like a really good thing to have a playground there for kids, there was nobody to look after it. So we decided that we would be the ones to look after it. And there was myself and 2 other youth from my community who came to this site. We kind of looked at it and we thought, oh my God, like, how are we going to do this? But we had a mentor, and she, along with the 3 of us, made a plan. So we made a plan about how we could actually reclaim that space. And so the first thing that we did was get rid of all of that brush. So there's a mystery to this story. We don't know how that brush is cut down, but it was piled as high as I am. So we organized volunteer days, and we got rid of the brush, and underneath the brush there was a big layer of garbage. It was the kids' fault. It wasn't the adults. And it was because there's no garbage disposal, there's no park maintenance, but it had accumulated over a number of years. So we got rid of the garbage. And below that there was a big cover of ivy. And so we've had several volunteer days from June 2017 to today to get rid of the ivy. And by last fall, we had cleared enough ivy to actually start putting in Indigenous foods and medicines back in that area. And for me, my healing journey has been by being on the land and by using my foods and medicines. So it was really important for me and for other people in our community that we brought those foods and medicines back in a place that's accessible to people. So if you guys ever want to visit, we have lots of different foods and medicines that are actually planted and growing really well in that area. We planted a bunch of pollinator species, native pollinator species, and we also discovered that the deer really love them, so those aren't there anymore. But I just wanted to show some of the things that are in bloom right now, and hey Eli. Just by putting in a little bit of attention and a little bit of care in that area, things just started to naturally come back. So below that mat of ivy, by the time spring came around, there were so many fawn lilies, and there were so many different types of ferns, and there was so much trailing blackberry, and like all of these different foods that were just waiting for us to help them came back, which is really special. And after that, we thought, okay, what can we do next? Like, what more can we do? And we thought about connecting more with the community garden in our area. So at the SNIWWOC Health Center, there's a community garden, and it's really thriving. And to kind of complement what they're doing, we decided to install a pollinator garden, which has been also really successful. So you can see a picture of a bee there, and he's landed on a Canada goldenrod. There's also a picture of coastal sage, and it's really amazing how just bringing these foods and medicines into like a small area, how they've reached like a lot of people. Something special that we've been doing with the coastal sage is that we pick the sage and we bring it to an event and we make sage bundles with people. And it's been really kind of a healing but also cool atmosphere when we're tying sage together. And it's really brought like large groups of people because you can just drop in and kind of make it in a 5-minute period. But the coastal sage that we planted has actually reached quite a lot of people. Yeah. The kind of second way that we do things, you guys saw that tall guy walk by? He's one of our mentors, and we really try to work through a mentorship approach. So because it's a group of different youth in our communities, they need people to kind of lead them away. Not lead them away, we need to lead them the way. And so we've had lots of different knowledge keepers mentoring youth and kind of building capacity and sharing cultural knowledge as well. So Eli was able to mentor a group of about 8 youth, and we didn't tell the youth what to do. We just wanted to be able to share whatever message they had to say, and I think it's important that we give youth a voice because youth know what's happening in their lives and they have lived experience that they can share, and that's exactly what happened. And even though we didn't say, you must film this, every single video that they've produced was a cultural film, which is really special. And I'm happy and excited to say that we're going to be able to do the same film cohort with Eli again. The next way that we do things is actually by doing it. So even though we plant things and they're in our area, we actually bring those foods and medicines in a workshop setting and talk about the traditional uses and make them in a modern way. So we're incorporating them into our daily lives, and we're trying to make this as accessible as possible. The next thing that we do that's really important to us is creating Indigenous youth-only spaces. And I feel very strongly about this. Indigenous youth need places where they can belong and where they can collaborate and they can really be real with each other. And we've developed a bunch of workshops where we talk about the connections between violence on land and violence on bodies, and what does that really mean, and how can we dig deeper, and how can we share this with people. So some really cool things have come out of that. And I really believe in learning by doing. So I'm up here talking, but I think it's better that we all go out there and actually do this stuff in whatever way we can. This is a picture, and that was a really special day. In the beginning of this slideshow, there's a picture of a woman. I don't know if you guys remember, it was in black and white, and she had a big mat, and that mat was full of camas. And that's our staple food system, and only 5% of it remains. But in this picture, it kind of captures that kind of monumental moment where in my community, for the first time in I don't know how long, we were actually digging up camas in our territory. And that's Chief Don Tom with 5 youth, and yeah, we dug it up, and we had Cheryl Bryce telling us, you know, like how we should be doing it, and how we can use camas, so that was pretty cool. And we also share things through social media. So we have an Instagram account, we have a Facebook group, and we've had some really cool conversations through Facebook Live. We really try to make that connection between colonization of land and colonization of people, and how that translates to violence on Indigenous peoples. And through our Facebook Live conversation, we got to talk about things like consent, and what does consent look like in our community, and how is it happening, or how does our culture fit in with this word consent. And it was with youth in our community, and people from our community jumped on and said, like, way to go, like, you guys are doing good, like, keep it up. So that was pretty neat. And the biggest thing has been bringing community together. So we're doing this work on the land, and we're learning, but we're really bringing community together in spaces where we haven't been before. People are coming into my community, and they're learning about the land they're on, and they're learning about what's happening in Sartlip. And that's been probably the biggest thing for me, is that people are shifting their mindset about what good work looks like. So that's probably been the biggest thing for me, and the biggest change. This is a declaration from my former 4 chiefs, and I just throw this up here to throw things off because they're declaring that we've never given up our lands. Yeah, and I think it's really important for the people in this room to think about what you can do. People always ask me, well, what can I do? Like, I want to help your project, or I want to be a part of it. But I think for most of the people in this room, it's up to you to do some of that work yourself. So find out, you know, whose territory are you on? Like, how can you fit in to the Indigenous community, and how can you take everyday action? So I invite everybody to learn Sinchapin, to learn my language. I invite you to come onto my territory and to be a part of the project. So I'd like to say Haishkasiyam, which is thank you, respected ones, and yeah, thank you, everybody.
All right, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Wilma Brown, and I'm the founder of the Support Network for Indigenous Women and Women of Color. I'll refer to that as SNIWWOC during clarifying. It's a long name. Thank you, Ruby, for inviting me here to speak, and thank you all for being here on a really awful Thursday. My week has been interesting. I want to acknowledge that I'm a settler here. I've lived here since 2011, the lands of the Filipino Spanish people, and my ancestry is Nigeria, although I've lived in a few different places since then, but Victoria has been home for the past 7 years, and I'm happy every day to live here and build community here. So I want to start off by maybe talking about myself a little bit, and talking about how SNIWWOC is trying to reshape the present and the future of healthcare in Victoria. It was a really wordy question, and I tried to break it down to really simple terms. So about me, like I said, I'm from Nigeria. I moved here in 2011, and one of the first things that really stuck with me when I moved here was the fact that I am Black. And it sounds really obvious because clearly I'm Black, but when you're African and you're from a country where it's majority Black, you don't think of yourself as Black, you just think of yourself as Nigerian. So in my case, I'm Nigerian, and if I wanted to dig deeper, I was my ethnic group. But since I've lived here, since I've lived outside the continent of Africa, I'm Black, and that comes with a lot of implications. And I will be talking specifically about the health implications of race and what that looks like maybe in Canada more broadly, and then what that looks like in Victoria, based on my experience and the experiences of the women in our organization that let us found in SNIWWOC. It's one of the things that a lot of people find out when they move to a place like Victoria, where it's really white, so a lot of community, is that they feel really isolated. And to people who've maybe lived here all their lives or haven't really traveled a lot, that's not something that makes a lot of sense because your community is where you've lived. But if you're from a different country, you speak a different language, your skin color looks different, finding community can be really difficult. And that has really bad health consequences. So it seems really odd to think that being isolated could result in negative health outcomes, but it does. So that was one of the issues that I noticed. I thought, I'm at UVic, and there's a lot of community there. However, where are the Black kids at? Where are the people who like eat African food at? That I thought about that a lot. And then I have these conversations with my friends on campus, and this is happening. Like, what's going on here? And then my friends who were from other parts of the world who were also racialized, which means just not being white and being able to be discriminated against based on their skin color, have similar experiences. And I find that oftentimes when you're foreign or marginalized by race, you think you're the only person who knows that experience, and it's really weird when somebody else is like, I feel that way. You're like, whoa, I'm not crazy, this is an actual thing. So that happened a lot, kept happening. And then my friends who are Indigenous would talk about going to like clinics and hospitals and having people assume that they are drunk or on drugs and keep asking them the same questions over and over again. So although one of my best friends is from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation in North Vancouver, and I'm from Nigeria, we had very similar experiences in terms of healthcare isolation by the community in Victoria, where we call home. So as a result of all these experiences of isolation, weird healthcare experiences at walking clinics or hospitals, or the campus health center at UVic, we decided to create SNIWWOC, Support Network for Indigenous Women and Women of Color, and that happened in October 2014. And we decided to bring our really weird negative experiences of healthcare to maybe be a bit more positive. So we decided to use a reproductive justice framework, and that essentially means that we are linking a woman's health and not making it this isolated problem, but linking it to broader systemic issues. So everything from race, poverty, immigration status, your accent, lots of issues. So we thought that that's something that we could do to maybe look at issues happening in Victoria. It's been 4 years, and tried to explain a bit of what we noticed the issues in Victoria look like and what we're doing to address them right now, and what we're hoping to work on in the future. So the first thing I talked about was social isolation, and it's not just about the quantity of contact. So a person could walk around downtown and see a lot of people who maybe look like them, but it's also about the quality. So having people who you consider a community is something that people in Victoria just don't have, and it's because Victoria, like I said, is just not that diverse. So research has shown that oftentimes people who suffer from perceived social isolation, because sometimes a person may have community but they still feel lonely, I mentioned earlier, is linked to negative health outcomes. And research says that that's mainly because if a person is lonely, they're probably not working out as much, they're probably feeling kind of sad and depressed, they're probably not sleeping well, which leads to heart disease, which sounds really weird, that something like loneliness could really impact a person so negatively, but it does, and it happens a lot in Victoria. So that's one of the issues that we have really tried to tackle and also like just pay attention to. Our second, the second thing we really work on quite a lot is food insecurity. In Victoria, because it's just not that diverse, a lot of immigrants who move here just don't have culturally adequate food. And it sounds really odd to say that food is an issue, but it is. I always tell people it's kind of like if you went to somewhere else in the world and you really want pizza, you can't get it. And it sounds so basic, but sometimes you just want pizza. So sometimes you just want food that's culturally relevant, that makes you feel like home. And when it's not available, you feel not that great. So that's an issue. And when my family first moved here, we noticed that how food, for a lot of immigrants, food is a really huge part of our identity and it's a huge part of our culture. And a lot of immigrants who come here who happen to be poor and have to access food banks get like a little can of soup, and really, to me, I found it odd just because I'm not from here. For people who grew up here, it's really normal, it's a part of your diet. But for lots of immigrants, they go to the food bank and they get products that they can't use. So although there are services that cater to food insecurity, sometimes they're not culturally relevant, which makes them sort of useless to immigrants and refugees, which is kind of counterproductive, but that happens. So I work at Viper, the Antiviolent Public Interest Research Group. And 2 years ago, we did a research project called Beyond Rice and Beans, Immigrants and Refugee Food Experiences in Victoria. And the numbers were not surprising to me, but were surprising to a lot of people who hadn't really thought about food more critically and how it links to identity in Victoria. So one of the things that we discovered was that 70% of immigrants said that if they had better food in Victoria, they would feel stronger community connections. 24% of them said that they've experienced discrimination in trying to access food in Victoria. And I've experienced that myself. It's everything from you're at the grocery store and you're like, you have okra, for instance. I love okra and I love plantains. And oftentimes, it hasn't happened a lot in the past few months, but people are like looking at my cart and they're like, what is that? That looks really weird. And you have to explain, so it's okra, oh, it's plantains, and it tastes like this. It's kind of like bananas, but not really bananas. So those kind of conversations happen quite a lot in Victoria. And the fact that people feel like people don't feel safe just being able to go to the grocery store and buy food that looks different or smells different is pretty sad. And over a quarter of them said that they have just challenges in general, just accessing food. And many of them said that they have to travel to Vancouver to get to buy groceries that are culturally relevant. I totally get that because when I first moved here, my first 3 years living in Victoria, I would go to Toronto once a year and I would have an empty suitcase just to buy African food. It sounds so absurd, but I'll come back and my suitcase would smell like just like the most interesting smells. And there was one time I was like on the way back and I was in the airport and my friend was like, our car smells like African stuff and you've left. What is going on? So like the struggle is so real, but it's something that a lot of immigrants feel so strongly about. I'm making jokes about it now, but I feel it very, very deeply. So that's something that SNIWWOC is really passionate about, is making sure that we are addressing issues around food insecurity in Victoria. And then something else that we talk about is accessing reproductive health care. I mentioned that earlier, being able to go to the clinic is something that a lot of Canadians take for granted because, free healthcare, especially when we compare ourselves to America. But the visit to the hospital or to a clinic is very different depending on what you look like and what your story is. So everything from accent discrimination, my mom has a much thicker accent than I do, and her experience going to a hospital, going to a clinic is very different from mine. So sometimes I have to go with her just to make people feel like she's not dumb, because for whatever reason people think if you have a stronger accent, you're probably stupid and don't really know what you're talking about. So accent discrimination happens a lot in healthcare facilities. Racism, so rampant. Lots of people think that Black people don't feel pain. There's lots of research done about that if you're Black and you go to access healthcare services, people will rate your pain as not as severe because they just assume that because you're Black, you have some weird supernatural abilities that can't feel pain. It's not true. So that's something that happens a lot. There's also the fact that a lot of doctors, when they're being trained, are trained with lighter skin tones. So when they're diagnosed in darker skin tones, they often make mistakes because they're just not used to seeing darker skin. So oftentimes darker skinned people get misdiagnosed in the medical system. Black women are more likely to get breast cancer than non-black women. There's also the fact that many doctors, and our work deals with a lot of healthcare, so we talk to doctors a lot, and many times they tell us, like, don't talk about this, but many doctors find immigrant women just like a lot of work. And I know that a lot of it is because of our healthcare system, people are in and out. So you're in there for like 8 minutes, whatever, however long, and they want you to come in and out. But they know if you're an immigrant, you're more likely to talk about your issues, which means you're there for longer, and it's more work administratively for the doctors. So they're just not as open to providing the most adequate care for women of color. And then there's more deeper issues like language sensitivity and actually having doctors who speak the languages of many immigrants in the city. Lots of barriers to access and reproductive healthcare. There's also for Indigenous communities, we know that Indigenous women are more likely to have teenage pregnancies, have STIs and STDs, are more likely to be victims of violent crime, and all this impacts the kind of reproductive health care they're getting, especially if my friend always says it's weird that the doctors always ask her if she's on drugs, and she doesn't introduce herself as like, I'm Indigenous. She's like, is there like a file and like, is there like a mark on my file that just says Indigenous girl coming in, you know, but we don't know how that works, but they always ask her those questions all the time. And she doesn't look how people I guess would describe as like a visibly racialized person. She looks quite racially ambiguous, but they just know she's Indigenous and they assume that there's just stuff going on, and sometimes it's just like a routine conversation with the doctor that goes south. Something else that we talk about a lot is mental illness. So being racialized, which means you're Indigenous or you're a person of color, you face a lot of unique challenges because you're facing racism, you're facing sexism, you're facing all these issues that can really affect your mental health. And oftentimes mental health professionals are just not equipped to deal with the complexities of that experience. So when my mom first moved to Canada, she struggled to get an adequate job like a lot of immigrant women who are often underemployed, although they are way more educated than the average Canadian population. So my mom really struggles to get a job, and sometimes she'd go to her doctor and just say, I'm really struggling to get a job, and I'm not feeling super good about it, and they'll immediately be like, you know what, you need to go on meds right now. You are crazy. And instead of trying to address the root of that problem, which is she probably needs immigrant support, she probably needs referrals to employment agencies. There's lots that can be done when an immigrant woman walks into the clinic, as opposed to assuming that because she's Black or because she's Indigenous that she's crazy or drunk. So there's also the stigma. People don't want to talk about mental illness. But on the positive side, research tells us that immigrant women and Indigenous women are more likely to seek support for mental illnesses, but they seek informal support. So they're not going to a doctor, they're relying on their friends and family, which can be looked at as positive. And then there's the issue of intergenerational trauma and poverty. The fact that 1 in 5 women is poor, but those numbers really increase if a woman is racialized. So lots of sad stuff. But what are we doing about it? It gets more positive here. So in October 2015, we started a monthly dinner series. It's called Food Inside of Community. And once a month, we gather together and we cook lots of food. And it sounds really, really basic, but the idea of coming together to cook food with people of color is really powerful. And those spaces are a space where women cook food from all over the world. We share our stories. We celebrate with each other. And it's everything from cooking regular daily foods to celebrating cultural events. So everything from Christmas to Eid to Ramadan. And I talked about isolation earlier. Being able to come together and create food really helps. A lot of women go there and make friends, being able to talk to people who share your experiences. And for people who are not immigrants or Indigenous women, just being able to be in that room and learn about the issues faced by these women is really, really powerful. So we've done that every month, and we've been doing it the first Thursday of the month, and it's a really powerful experience, and it's something that I really enjoy sharing with the community. And we make sure that the dinners are free because free food is great. Something else that we really prioritize is refugee support. When I talk about reproductive justice, which is linking reproductive health care with greater systemic issues, we feel like bringing families together is a reproductive justice issue. So we really advocate for people in the community who are trying to bring their families from refugee camps or anywhere in the world to be able to do that in Victoria. And that's everything from doing fundraisers, cooking food with them, helping them with appointments and meetings. It really goes quite far. And then information. I talk about how people just don't know what's happening in the community because they feel isolated. We really try to get the information and the education out there that there's services, but oftentimes people don't know because maybe they don't speak the language or they just don't have those connections. So we try to bring that information to service providers, so everything from the ICA to Berks, Island Sexual Health, or places where immigrants are likely to congregate. Something else that we do is advocacy work. So I feel really strongly about the fact that service providers in Victoria and healthcare professionals should be more empathetic. So I don't think it's too much to ask a doctor. You don't have to know a woman's entire story, but being able to listen to her when she comes and says, like, I'm feeling sad because war, or because trauma, because whatever. I think being able to take time to listen and empathize is really basic, and it's something that I think medical care professionals can do, and it's something that we're really advocating for in Victoria. And then also pushing for increased representation. We think that it's important for women to get culturally relevant care, and that does not mean that it has to be a woman of color, but it just means that the people should be able to understand the immigrant experience and respond adequately. We also do a lot of arts-based work, and we target that towards youth in Victoria because we know that there's multiple ways to engage youth about reproductive justice, so we really prioritize using photo voice to get youth to think of their bodies in terms of consent, things like violence. And the reason for that is that photo voice is quite participatory, and it really encourages reflection, which is something that oftentimes people of color are forced to not do. When we think of things like colonization, racism, we don't really do a lot of reflection because it's painful to really reflect on violence and trauma. I talked about not thinking of myself as Black. When I started to think of myself as Black, it was kind of sad to be like, whoa, like, so I'm Black and I'm gonna experience a lot of racism because of that. So we guide youth in thinking of their bodies and their experiences in a way that's not necessarily negative, but empowering, and also building on autonomy. What's next for us? So I mentioned cultural sensitivity training. This is a huge one that is also really difficult because doctors are great, but many times they're really stuck in their ways and don't want to be exposed to alternative ways of interacting with their patients. So we have been talking with the Division of Family Practice in Victoria to do large-scale trainings for doctors in Victoria, and it's everything from not really in-depth, time-consuming workshops to just being able to tell them, this is an issue that you guys know, here's some ways that we have heard, here's some ways that we've received feedback from our community that you could do better. And we're still working on it, but it's looking promising. Also financial advice. We know that women of color and immigrant women and Indigenous women are more likely to be poor. So we are wanting to really hone down on providing financial advice for those communities, because oftentimes financial advice is just work really hard and save money and invest and you're good. But that advice doesn't really work across the board. So we want to really focus on these communities and talk about debt management and basic things that is not basic to other communities who just don't have access. And then mental health support. We know that in Victoria there's just not enough providers that really talk about providing mental health support for in terms of reproductive health. You can get a therapist for a lot of things, but if you want to have an abortion, or you're thinking of you just had a baby, you're going through postpartum stress disorder, you're not likely to get a person who would provide that specific service. So we are wanting to apply for funding to get more specific, specialized mental health support for women of color who need reproductive health support in that way. And then organizational growth. We are a team of a few people. We have 5 board members, and we have 1 staff person, so we're very small, but we're always looking for volunteers and trying to expand the work that we're doing, which we've been doing a lot in the past year. We have a fundraiser happening here on October 6th, so it's a time of growth for SNIWWOC, and we're really excited. And it just means lots of volunteer work and making sure that people are aware of the work that we do in Victoria. So my question to you guys, I've talked about empathy a lot. I want to ask you guys to reflect on what empathy looks like to you and how you practice empathy towards people who don't look like you. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Lauren Daniel. Let's transition here.
Yeah, thanks, Ruben, and thanks everyone for coming out tonight. And the whole house, so it's sitting room only, standing people all over the place. And there's very tempting chairs all around the edge. I'd rather just sit in that. So I'm here to talk about urban place and what happens with it in our society, and how we define urban place, and how we can look at change in urban spaces. I also came to Victoria in 2011 and thought, hey, what a cool city. This is really interesting. As an urbanist, I've worked for many years in cities and in citizen engagement and change processes and all that. And I thought Victoria's just got so much going for it. And little did I know that a few years later, I would be saying, why is this city so change resistant? And it's an interesting city that way, isn't it? That people come here like me and like all of us other settlers and so on, and get entrenched and think it's ours, right? And get really upset about a statue of some guy from 100 years ago that's saying, don't erase history, and we've just tried to erase like 4,000 years of history, right? So the mindset, I just find really interesting how people get set in sort of their sense of, this is what my city means, this space here, and don't you ever tamper with that. Because if we take a broad enough view, these things are much bigger than us as individuals. We're going to be gone. This place is going to be different, and I think we need to take a little different perspective sometimes. So change happens and disruption happens, and we often lose perspective on the fact that we're all the time. If you go up and down, I would say pretty much every block in Victoria these days, there's a construction project, right? So that is disruption. Like we're literally digging up the city and changing it. And yet people seem to get very upset about other kinds of citizen-based intentional disruption. And if you look around just at little things, people, Jane Jacobs was a great urbanist who sort of said, just look at what people do in neighborhoods and communities. And if you look around, you start to see things like, why does a person need to put a little sign out on their lawn? And I've seen handmade versions of this one about, for God's sake, slow down, people, right? We got kids on this street. That kind of thing. And that's really telling. Those kind of things, I'm really fascinated by those little small urban interventions where people say, my street's not working for me. Let's do something about it. And what my thing here today and in general is talking about how we can look at different ways of initiating change and making it happen. I started soon after I came to town, putting on a construction worker's vest and standing in the middle of streets and redirecting traffic and stuff, a sort of urban experiment. And we started a little walking group around various places. At that time, Burnside Gorge community was going through some urban planning stuff that the city was doing. And it's fascinating when you can take any corner in the city and go out there into our public space and say, how is it being used? And what we need to ask ourselves is actually look at the public space and see how it's being used. What we have, our community for the most part happens in the public space. It happens sure in our private homes, but community really is the public thing, right? And we tend to forget in our society that what the engineers will call the public right-of-way, which is from the property line of this building across the street to the property line, the next private property line, that public right-of-way, that belongs to us. That's ours. We are the public. We tend to forget that. So we did a number of walking groups kind of going out into our space and saying, how could this be different? This was a corner up in Burnside Gorge where we said, this is awful street to try to cross as a pedestrian. It's dangerous for someone in a wheelchair. It's dangerous for someone who has to walk slowly with a walker. It's dangerous for little kids. And if you just looked at it, there's this massive, big, wide turn lane. And because that turn lane was there, cars like this little blue truck here could make that turn at 30 kilometers an hour. And you need to look at it and say, why? Why can't they come up, make a stop, make a right turn at like maybe 4 kilometers an hour, and all of a sudden it's safer for everybody, including the driver of the little truck. So that's a lot of what we started to do, and that is called, the term that's kind of being adopted around the world now is tactical urbanism. So a little definition there, city organizational or citizen-led approach to neighborhood building using short-term, low-cost, scalable interventions. So tactical urbanism is doing very short-term things like you've probably heard about parking days in a number of cities. It started in San Francisco, I think, where people would go down, if necessary, plug a parking meter, but take over car parking spaces. And what they're doing is making that very visual kind of statement of, hey, folks, could we think about how we're using this space? Could we possibly use it differently, even for a few hours? And it's tactical because it's short term, but it's also saying, could we think about some longer term change here? There's another example of they've taken over, if you look at the sign up there, reserved for the mayor. So the mayor's reserved parking stall. Our mayor doesn't have a reserved parking stall, but that kind of thing of saying, let's think about and do things a little differently in our community. It's tactical, but it's also strategic because we're looking forward to the future and how things should work and how they could work differently. So here's a great little example that I love from Hamilton, which was a number of citizens who were concerned about their kids having to cross an intersection that was dangerous going to school every morning. And they got just no response from the city of Hamilton. They said, yeah, we'll put it on the list, and they knew that like 15 years from now, they might come out and do a traffic assessment or something. So folks went out there with, power drill and plastic cones that they bought at Home Depot and made a wider pedestrian area on that corner. The city, of course, was furious. This is what it looked like in daylight when the cars came, but it forced the cars to make a wider turn around that corner. But the city, to its credit, came around, and I don't have the after, well actually that is an after photo. That's city poured concrete on that corner because the city's, recognized that, hey, people had a case here. So around Victoria, we've done some things. I say we, a lot of urbanists through a group, Ray in the back there is president now of Greater Victoria Placemaking Network. We've done things, this is one of our events called chair bombing. and it's like yarn bombing, but it's changing a public space just by, in this case, bringing your lawn chairs and occupying it, and being there, and making it feel different. So a lot of people don't realize that there's many public spaces in our city, and this happens to be a place called Millie's Lane, which is right beside the Odeon Theater down the street here. And people look at it and they think that it's, a lot of people think that it's private property. In some cases it is privately owned, but it's written into their development agreement that they have to provide public access. But that's an example of a plaza where the furniture provided by whoever developed it is so awful that it was just tempted us that you had to do something. They've got bolted chairs, they're bolted to concrete, intentionally with them facing away from one another so you don't have to look at someone else in the eyes, right? You know, like, come on, people. So it's looking at who is the street for, who is, and you know, street, it's not just pavement and so on, but it's just all of our public spaces. What's our shared spaces? And certainly we could talk tonight a whole lot about the tent cities that are roaming around, but I won't go that direction. But who is our public spaces for? This is a project that we had a little bit of involvement with down on Collinson Street, which is painting a mural, again with the intention of traffic calming, so slowing down cars. And here's one we did in collaboration with the City of Victoria a few years back, where we took the intersection of Cook and Dallas Road and Cook Street itself, the south end of Cook Street, and said, you can do so much more with this. And so we had them, a city crews came and put down this tape for new crosswalks. It's really interesting to learn this stuff that's available. Like there's this tape that you can put down and just use a little heat gun and it stays for like a few months. It won't stay forever. And we changed that, put in some crosswalks. We created a bike lane just with pylons and a few planters in a matter of hours. And so that's sort of, you know, showing a city and some of the people that are working in organizations, you can do these things and you can do them more quickly and you can do them more nimbly. But most important, that particular idea came from people in the neighborhood saying, we can't get across there safely, our kids can't bike up that street to go to school and so on. You see this happening around, like this is Haltane Commons, but this is another example. You see boulevard gardening now happening in many places around the City of Victoria. That was citizen guerrillas, you know, who started that. That was people doing it illegally who started boulevard gardening. Now it's an official city program. So that's how tactical urbanism works, is you have to sometimes do something that somebody doesn't like, and then sort of challenge the formal organizations to say, we should be doing this kind of thing. We should be doing it more often. We did this down, a little experiment down on Pandora Street with some volunteer-built planters, and companies donated materials and so on right out in front of our place, and built a number of planters there. It wasn't the most successful project, but it was a challenging one, and it took a lot of time and a lot of effort. But again, there was a whole community learning process that happened from that one. So now a number of people are continuing to look at that block of Pandora and work with people that live there and that are there all the time around, you know, how can we make it more inviting and healthier spaces. The intent there was to actually grow food there that people who are food challenged would have some access to. The other thing we're doing is little free libraries, encouraging those. The Placemaking Network is doing this all around the city. And what we're encouraging people to do is look at little pocket places. So this is one again on Collinson Street where, you know, put a little free library, a free book exchange in, put a bench there, do a mural on your street. You start to create a sense of community where people can gather in that informal way, so that we're not all just sitting in our little condos and homes and not engaging in community. So where this can go, I'll wrap up up in the next minute and 20 here, is in some cities, like Memphis is a good example. They've got an organization that came forward and worked with the city and created a manual called MemFix about fixing public spaces. But what they did is a toolkit for doing all these things for citizens, but also for like people who work for the cities and so on. Like how do you get it through your own organization to allow some creative things to happen in public space? And that's where you need to really do is sort of help organizations rewrite their own rule books, because otherwise you're just sort of constantly kind of fighting against that. And then another thing that's been done in a number of cities, and San Francisco and others, is these urban prototyping festivals, where you just, to try to get momentum, you try to build more of these by maybe having a week or a month or something during the year where you encourage all kinds of organizations, get some of our high-tech companies and others in the city involved in doing a bunch of innovative projects all at once, so that you can follow up on the ones that are most interesting and that work and don't work. I've got with me a couple of books if someone wants to look at them. One's called Tactical Urbanism by Mike Lydon and Anthony Garcia. We keep trying to get Mike here into Victoria to speak sometime, maybe at a future city talk. Great, he goes all around the world doing tactical urbanism stuff. And then the other thing to look at is the website for Victoria Placemaking, victoriaplacemaking.ca, and that's where a whole bunch of local citizens are doing grassroots, citizen-led urban change. Thanks so much.
Okay, our next speaker is Todd Littman.
So, let me tell you about inclusive and affordable and equitable community design. And let me start off with just a little recent event. A city in Italy just closed off its streets for cars. Most cities, you go back 100 years and they were designed for people. But over the last century, we have increasingly shifted our city space over to cars. Cars are very space intensive. And so it's really dramatic when you shift, when a city closes its streets. You know what people said? You can hear the birds. You don't have to talk as loud because you don't have the traffic. Now, this is the kind of issue that I work on. Let's see if this works here. Yes. Okay. We can think of it not just from people. Think about art. What is good art? Is good art attractive, interesting, engaging, interactive, human-oriented, meaningful, socially stimulating? Is this what good art requires? This? Yeah? Okay. This is what, on the left, is what you can do if the basic unit is a person. Things are scaled for people. And it can be interactive. It can be meaningful. This is what you get. This is the artwork you get when you scale the community for cars. The automobile-oriented art has to be great. It has to be big. It has to be bland. It has to be bad. So, fortunately, Victoria has outstanding pedestrian-oriented art. So I'm just starting off. I want to sort of get you thinking about some of the trade-offs that exist in the way cities are designed. This is my radical idea. If you're a right-wing, market-oriented political conservative, you think making people happy is all about increasing productivity and incomes. And if you're a leftist, socialist, you think that making the world a better place and happiness is all about changing the distribution of wealth. I am proposing a new economics, bottom-up economics. And that raises the question, what does it take for people to be poor but happy? Is that possible?
Yes.
Is it possible that people can be poor but happy? Yes. Okay, what are the practical needs to be poor and happy? What is the greatest expense for most households? Rent. Homes. On average, households, your housing, your shelter is your most expensive expense. After that is transportation, and after that is food. Okay? So, to achieve this, the real functional way that our community can allow people to be happy but poor means affordable housing and affordable transportation. And so this is what I work on. Here's one way to think of it. Conventional economics says people who own a car. Okay, let me ask you this. In Victoria, is it possible, if you're a young guy and you want to invite a popular person on a date, do you need a car? No. There are lots of places in the world where a guy is embarrassed to ask somebody out on a date and say, we're going to bicycle or we're going to take a bus. There's a huge breakthrough when your community, when your social standard says that a popular date will say, yes, I go on dates by walking and bicycling and public transit. And there's actually a benefit. If a guy spends all of his money on his car, he's got nothing left to spend on the date. It is actually rational to say, I would prefer to go on a date by bus or bike, because there's more money. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit, very briefly, about the research I do on what you could call the benefits of living in a walkable community, or the benefits of living in smart growth. And one of the first ones, it's very clear, measurable, there's plenty of research showing if you live in a walkable community, you are likely to be healthier. So walkable communities is the basic foundation to be not only be able to survive without spending a lot of money on your car, but also being healthier. And the good news is we actually have a fairly walkable city. The center of the city, you can actually see, this is the walk score heat map, so this is a way of looking at what is the most walkable parts. Okay, so what this is basically saying is there's a huge benefit to ensure that anybody who wants to live in the walkable neighborhoods, and now to their credit, Langford is becoming a little bit walkable in the core. If you want people to be healthy and have economic opportunity, they're not burdened by the high cost of owning a car, you want to make sure that anybody who wants should be able to live in the walkable urban neighborhood. Another outstanding factor that the research shows is if you live in a smart growth compact community, your chance of dying in a car crash is about a quarter. Look at how low. This is deaths per 100,000 population. It's a quarter as high in the smart growth communities as in the dumb growth communities, right? Okay, is that surprising? If you have, let's say, a 16 or 17-year-old boy, son, and you live in one of these communities, what do you do what do you give him for his birthday? A car. You're tired of chauffeuring him everywhere. And it's just normal. If you live in a suburban area, it's normal for the 16 and 17-year-old young people to get a car. And that is a very high risk time. There's very good reasons to, or let me put it this way. When somebody goes shopping for a house, and they're trying to decide where to locate, should they live out in central Saanich or buy a house in Victoria, one of the things the real estate agents don't usually mention is that the central Saanich is a dangerous place to raise your children. The common assumption is there's something safe about suburbia and something dangerous about cities. And the research actually shows the opposite. It is far safer to live and raise children in a walkable, multimodal neighborhood. Okay, economic opportunity. There's also very good research. The latest study, there are many studies on this, but the latest studies ask, does urban sprawl hold down upward mobility? So they used a new data set that the Harvard University researchers developed, where they were able to access income tax records for multiple generations. So they were actually able to look at what your parents were earning 2 or 3 decades earlier. And what they found, and they were able to geocode this, which means they were able to map where people were growing up. And what they found, what this study and others are finding, is that low-income children who grow up in a multimodal, walkable neighborhood are much more likely to be economically successful as adults. And what it boils down to is, if you grow up in an automobile-dependent area, you're totally dependent on cars. And so if you're poor and you either don't own a car or your car is always breaking down, you're always in a financial crisis. And your children lose those opportunities that exist if you live in a multimodal area. Here's one map just showing the number of jobs that are accessible depending on where you live. This and other research shows that there are economic, there are social, there are health, and there are environmental benefits if more people are able to live in a walkable urban neighborhood. By the way, this is the carbon footprint. This is Toronto. The green means you're producing less carbon emissions, red means you're producing more. This and plenty of other research shows much higher carbon emissions for people who live in automobile-dependent sprawled areas. Okay, now this sounds, yes?
Sorry, does that area include any agricultural land? The carbon footprint?
It probably does. I mean, one of the things about sprawl is that you're consuming more land per capita. Your houses are bigger, have bigger input. You need more road, more space for parking. You need more parking lots and more roads. Let's turn that in. That sounds negative. What's the positive statement? If we have more compact infill development, we're reducing the expansion onto open space, onto agricultural lands or wildlife habitat. So here's an interesting series of studies. Every few years, the National Association of Realtors in the US does a survey asking people what kind of housing they want. And they force the respondents to choose between a single family house in a sprawled location, so your transportation costs will be high, or having to accept, say, a townhouse, living in a townhouse, but you'd be in a more compact location. And what they found is over the last 4 years, the portion of households that prefer the townhouse, even if it meant, or prefer the walkable neighborhood, even if it meant living in a townhouse rather than a bigger lot house, more than half of all households now prefer the townhouse. There is a lot of people now are rationally, a lot of households are rationally saying, I would rather live in one of the downtown or one of the closer in neighborhoods, even if it means I can't have a big house with a big yard, because suddenly the city is my yard. The city becomes my space. Okay, so here is where it becomes political. What it boils down to is apartment or a townhouse costs about half as much to build and uses between 1/3 and 1/10 as much land as a typical single-family house. And so if we want this infill, if we want more people living in our efficient neighborhoods, we need a mechanism so that what's a parcel of land that's currently single-family can now become 3 townhouses or 10 apartments. Do we allow that in Victoria? No. No. This yellow here shows all the land that's devoted only basically to single-family housing. Basically 2-story limit. And this is about 60% of Victoria's developable land is dedicated to expensive, land-intensive type housing. So I am a great supporter of what we call the missing middle. and dynamic planning that allows us to shift. So a neighborhood that's currently only allows single-family detached now starts allowing these more diverse, dense, compact housing types. You don't need to talk about high-rises. We're talking about 3 and 4 stories. So our organization called Cities for Everyone, we did a study looking at how much growth is occurring in those walkable neighborhoods or in different neighborhoods. And the green shows the neighborhoods, which are, not surprisingly, downtown, Harris Green, Vic West, and Burnside. These are the neighborhoods where the growth, the housing growth rate is equal to our city's population growth rate. And the blue shows the neighborhoods where they're basically exclusive. They're not allowing infill development. So the radical idea that I have is that we should welcome more people into our community, not just out of generosity, although there's great generosity in doing this, but there's also a selfish reason. Let's say you're one of those people living in one of those townhouses, or one of those houses in Fairfield or Rockland, and you have this anti-development sign in your lawn saying, protect my neighborhood. What's going to happen in a few years when you can no longer maintain your single-family house? Does your neighborhood, does Rockland or Fairfield have the housing that you're going to want to move into in the future when it's time to downsize, when you can no longer maintain that? So this is, I think, a really positive message. If you dig down, more compact infill in walkable urban neighborhoods is a real win-win. Basically, everybody can benefit. It increases safety and health. It's more affordable and inclusive. It's more resource efficient. You get more of this community interaction that we're talking about, so you really become part of your community, and it actually supports economic development. If you're a business, you have every reason to support this. So, what does it mean? Well, if I've convinced you, I have an ask. Our organization, Cities for Everyone, is working to advocate for more affordable infill in the current municipal election, October 20th, so a month from now. And here's what it boils down to. Young and low income households tend to vote at half the rate as older and more affluent people. And so your city council, unless we can mobilize people who are young and low income people who are currently not voting to go out there and vote, city councils will continue to favor expensive housing and expensive transportation over the more accessible, inclusive, affordable alternatives. So, and this is what these graphs show, this difference in voting rates. And so not we, but everybody in this audience and everybody who cares about creating a more affordable and inclusive community here in Victoria, in our Victoria region, should make sure that they vote for the candidates that support more affordable infill. Absolutely, so vote for affordability. Thank you very much.